In Coldwater Correctional Facility, a black inmate was about to endure a humiliation that would ignite silent fury across racial lines. What started as a cafeteria tray in the chow line spiraled when Sergeant Ray Kincaid, a veteran white guard, with a taste for power games, spat directly into Marcus Tillman's food, loud, deliberate, and in full view of 400 inmates. Marcus Tillman wasn't your typical inmate. For 3 years, he had endured Coldwater's systemic abuse with quiet resolve. Known for being a former civil rights organizer, the prison's respected librarian, and an unshakable jailhouse lawyer. When Kincaid escalated from verbal taunts to a racially charged act of public degradation, he had no idea he was messing with a man who'd spent years mapping the prison's rhythms, connections, and pressure points. Marcus responded not with violence, but with strategy, silently dumping the soiled tray and setting in motion a disciplined, multi-racial protest network that would ripple through every block. What began as a single abuse of power would become a non-violent rebellion, too coordinated to crush and too visible to ignore. The Coldwater administration would never forget the day Sergeant Kincaid realized too late that the man he tried to break was the one holding the blueprint to dismantle the system from within. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights of Coldwater Correctional Facilities. Cafeteria hummed with the same lifeless drone that had soundtracked Marcus Tillman's last 3 years. Trays clattered, metal spoons scraped against plastic, and the low murmur of 400 men trying to eat quickly filled the cavernous space. Mississippi summer heat made the air thick despite industrial fans that pushed it around without cooling anything. "Move it, inmate. You think this is the Hilton?" Sergeant Ray Kincaid's voice carried across the chow line, sharpened by years of practice. He stood with his thumbs hooked in his belt, chest puffed beneath a perfectly pressed uniform, watching inmates shuffle forward with the satisfied expression of a man who believed the world operated exactly as it should. Marcus kept, his eyes down as the line inched forward. 42 years old, with salt beginning to pepper his close-cropped hair, he'd learned that prison survival meant selective invisibility. Once a civil rights organizer at Jackson State, now the prison librarian and unofficial jailhouse lawyer, he'd built a careful reputation, respectful to guards' faces, invaluable to inmates behind their backs. "Tillman," Kincaid called out, voice suddenly silky with menace. "How's my favorite college boy today?" Marcus kept his face neutral. "No complaints, sir." "No complaints," Kincaid mimicked, his southern drawl exaggerating the words. Listen to that proper English, wasted on a man who couldn't figure out which side of a protest line to stand on. Several guards chuckled. Marcus felt eyes on him, both inmates and officers, but maintained his practiced calm. 3 years had taught him that Kincaid's provocations were tests. Tests he refused to fail. At the serving line, a kitchen trustee slid a tray toward Marcus. The usual Tuesday fare: gray meatloaf, reconstituted potatoes, canned green beans. But as Marcus reached for the tray, Kincaid stepped closer. "Hold up," Kincaid said, positioning himself between Marcus and the food. "You're looking mighty hungry today, Tillman." The cafeteria didn't exactly quiet, but a ripple of attention spread outward like a stone dropped in still water. Even the trustees behind the counter froze, ladles suspended in midair. "Something wrong with my tray, sir?" Marcus asked, voice level. Kincaid smiled, the expression never reaching his pale blue eyes. He leaned over the tray, making a show of inspecting it. Then, with deliberate slowness, he gathered saliva in his mouth and spat directly onto Marcus's meatloaf. The sound that followed wasn't a gasp. Inmates knew better, but a collective inhalation, the oxygen seemingly sucked from the room. "Now there's nothing wrong with it," Kincaid said, still smiling. "Enjoy your lunch, Tillman." Marcus stared at the glob of spit glistening on his food. In 3 years at Coldwater, he'd witnessed worse: beatings, stabbings, men dragged to solitary for nothing. But this was different. Public. Performative. A message not just to him, but to every black inmate watching. You are nothing. For a fraction of a second, something hot and dangerous flashed behind Marcus's eyes. a glimpse of the fire that had once driven him to stand at the front of marches. Then just as quickly it was gone, replaced by the careful mask he'd perfected. Marcus looked up, meeting Kincaid's gaze directly. Said nothing. Reached for his tray. Kincaid's smile faltered slightly, disappointed by the lack of reaction. "What's wrong? Lost your appetite?" Marcus could feel Devin Harper, Big D to everyone inside, watching from 3 spots back in line, his massive frame tense. Could feel dozens of other eyes, waiting to see what would happen next. Could sense the guards' hands subtly shifting toward their batons. "No, sir," Marcus finally said, voice quiet but carrying in the tense silence. "Just wondering if there's anything else you'd like to add before I eat." The implied defiance was subtle enough to evade discipline, but clear enough that several inmates suppressed smiles. Kincaid's face darkened. "Move along, Tillman. Don't make me tell you twice." Marcus took his tray and walked away, feeling the weight of the moment. He passed the filled tables, aware that every man in the cafeteria had either seen or would soon hear about what happened. As he approached his usual spot, he caught sight of a new guard, Monroe, according to his nameplate, watching, with obvious discomfort from his post by the wall. Their eyes met briefly. The young guard looked away first. Marcus set his tray down at a table where Harper would soon join him, then deliberately walked to the trash cans and dumped the untouched food. A small act of dignity that didn't violate any rules but spoke volumes. As he walked back to sit with an empty place before him, the whispers had already begun. "Heard what happened at Chow," Devin Harper said later as they walked the yard, his voice low despite the open space. At 6'4" with shoulders like twin boulders, he moved with the deliberate care of someone who knew his size made guards nervous. Kincaid's always been a racist piece of shit, but that was crossing a line. Marcus kept his pace measured, eyes scanning the yard's perimeter where guards stood posted. It wasn't about the food. "Man spits in your tray in front of everyone, and you're telling me it's not personal?" Harper raised an eyebrow. "Didn't say it wasn't personal. Said it wasn't about the food." Marcus paused as they reached the fence corner, the farthest point from any guard tower. It was about showing who has power. Harper's laugh was without humor. Like anybody needed that reminder in this place. Marcus watched a group of white inmates heatedly discussing something across the yard. Word was spreading. Racial lines, always present but sometimes blurred by mutual survival needs, were hardening by the hour. 3 weeks ago, Diaz from C Block filed that complaint about work safety in the laundry, Marcus said. Last week, Rodriguez got jumped after lights out. Yesterday, Williams caught a write-up for insubordination when he asked for his prescribed pain meds. He turned to Harper. "You see the pattern?" Harper's eyes narrowed as he connected the dots. Black and brown inmates who speak up get put down. And today they came for me. Marcus took a deep breath of the humid Mississippi air. They're sending a message. "So what's our message back?" Harper asked, tension vibrating beneath his controlled exterior. "'Cause the brothers are looking to you, Marcus. After today, they're waiting on a word." Marcus glanced toward the new guard, Monroe, who stood awkwardly at his post, trying too hard to look natural. Young. Nervous. Out of place. "I need to think," Marcus finally said. "Tell everyone to stay calm. No individual actions." Harper studied. That notebook you've been writing in at night, this connected?" Marcus didn't answer directly. "We've been sleeping too long, D. Maybe it's time we all woke up." In his cell that night, after his cellmate's breathing had deepened into sleep, Marcus reached between his thin mattress and metal bed frame. His fingers found the spiral notebook he'd flattened and concealed there, its pages filled with neat handwriting. 3 months of observations, guard rotations, administrative vulnerabilities, potential allies, pressure points within Coldwater's ecosystem. Not a plan for escape. Marcus harbored no such delusions, but something potentially more powerful. A blueprint for exposing the truth. He thumbed to a blank page and began writing, starting with the date and a simple entry. Kincaid made his move today. Now I make mine. The incident in the cafeteria had done what months of careful planning couldn't. It had united the inmates in silent outrage and revealed a crack in the guards' unified front. He'd seen it in Monroe's uncomfortable expression, in the way the rookie had looked away when Kincaid laughed. Systems like Coldwater survived on two pillars: the dehumanization of the powerless and the unquestioning loyalty of those enforcing the rules. Today, Marcus had glimpsed weakness in both. He wrote until lights out ended, then carefully returned the notebook to its hiding place. Tomorrow, he would take the first step in a plan that had been forming since he arrived at Coldwater, a plan not of violence, but of strategic resistance. Of exposing what happened in places the public never saw, using the very rules and procedures the system claimed to follow. Staring up at the darkness, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years: purpose. Kincaid had meant to break him today. Instead, he'd broken the final chain holding Marcus back. Marcus arrived at the prison library 15 minutes before his shift began, nodding to the departing trustee who'd handled the morning hours. Coldwater's library was modest: 3 rows of metal shelving, a collection heavy on tattered paperbacks, and outdated legal references. But it was his domain. For 4 hours each afternoon, this cramped room with its barred windows became the closest thing to freedom he could find. "All yours, Tillman," said C.O. Parker, a middle-aged guard who generally left Marcus alone. "Nothing exciting today. Keep the legal eagles from fighting over the typewriter." "Yes, sir," Marcus responded, settling behind the desk as Parker retreated to his station by the door. The library remained empty for the first 20 minutes, unusual but not surprising given yesterday's incident. Word traveled fast inside Coldwater, and inmates would be cautious, watching for ripple effects. Marcus used the time to sort through returned books from the cart. When he opened a dog-eared copy of the autobiography of Malcolm X, a small piece of paper fell out. Inmate communication written in tiny, precise letters. "Brothers in C block standing by. What's the play?" Marcus pocketed it swiftly, continuing his sorting. By the time the first inmates trickled in, he had found 3 similar notes hidden in returned books, all asking versions of the same question. Marcus had spent 3 years building respect without ever explicitly requesting loyalty. Now, the quiet power of his reputation was revealing itself. Jordan Ellis, a young inmate from D Block, approached the desk. "Got anything new on civil procedure?" he asked, his voice casual, eyes communicating something else entirely. Marcus pulled a binder from beneath the desk. "Check section 1983. There's updated annotation on institutional liability." As Ellis took the binder, Marcus slipped a folded note between its pages. Ellis nodded almost imperceptibly and moved to a reading table. Throughout the afternoon, the pattern repeated. Inmates came ostensibly seeking books but really exchanging information. Marcus's messages were consistent: stay disciplined, document everything, trust no one who approaches you first. Phase 1 beginning. When Devin Harper arrived an hour before, closing, his massive frame filling the doorway, the few remaining inmates took the cue and filtered out. "Library closing early today?" Parker called from his post. "Just giving Mr. Harper some assistance with his appeal," Marcus replied smoothly. The guards knew Harper was serving life without parole. The appeal story was transparent, but gave them plausible deniability. Parker shrugged. 15 minutes. When they were relatively alone, Harper leaned against the desk, keeping his voice low. "Got your message. Vasquez wants to know why he should trust you now when B and C blocks haven't exactly been friendly." Marcus meticulously stamped return, dates and books as they spoke. "Because Kincaid and his crew don't see Latino or black when they look at us. They just see inmates. Tell Vasquez I'm not asking for friendship. I'm offering mutual benefit." Harper nodded. "What about the Aryan Brotherhood? They've been watching this too." "They'll stay out of it if we stay out of their business. They hate the guards as much as we do, but they hate us more." Marcus slid a book across the counter. Page 47. "Memorize it, then destroy it." Harper took the book without opening it. "You sure about this, Marcus? Once we start..." "It started long before we got here, D." Marcus looked up, the mask momentarily dropping to reveal the intensity beneath. We're just finally fighting back the right way. CO Eli Monroe found himself lingering in the medical unit long after he'd dropped off inmate files. 3 weeks into his job at Coldwater, and he still couldn't navigate the labyrinthine halls without second-guessing every turn. At least that's what he told himself as he hesitated outside Nurse Boone's office. Either come in or move along, young man. You're blocking my light. Carla Boone sat at her desk, reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed charts. At 57, she had the direct gaze of someone who had seen it all and the no-nonsense manner that earned respect from both inmates and staff. Sorry, ma'am, Monroe said, stepping inside and closing the door partway. I was just wandering around looking like you've seen a ghost since yesterday, she finished for him, setting her pen down. And I can guess why. Word travels. Monroe glanced back at the partially open door. Is it that obvious? Only to someone who's been here 23 years. She gestured to the chair opposite her desk. Sit before you fall down, you look like you haven't slept. Monroe sank into the chair, removing his cap and running a hand through his short brown hair. I don't know what to do, he admitted, voice barely above a whisper. Yesterday in the cafeteria, Sergeant Kincaid spat in Tillman's food, Boone finished. Yes, I know. And nobody's doing anything about it, Monroe continued, frustration bleeding into his tone. I asked my supervising officer if I should file a report, and he laughed. Said welcome to Coldwater. Boone studied him, brown eyes shrewd behind her glasses. Let me ask you something, Mr. Monroe. Why did you take this job? Student loans, he answered honestly. Economy's bad. Corrections, pays better than retail. And they didn't tell you what it would cost you, did they? She shook her head. This place changes people, son. Some walk in decent and walk out monsters. Others watch it happen and tell themselves they're not part of it. So what am I supposed to do? Monroe asked, frustration evident. Report Kincaid to the warden? I'd be labeled a snitch before my next shift. I didn't say there were good options, Boone replied evenly. Just bad and worse ones. She turned back to her paperwork. All I'll say is this. Someday you'll look back on your time here, and you'll have to live with the man you became. Choose carefully. As Monroe left the medical unit, her words followed him down the corridor. So did the image of Marcus Tillman's face, the dignity in it as he'd walked away from that desecrated tray. You should have seen his face, Kincaid slapped, his knee relishing the attention of his audience in the officer's break room. College boy thinks he's better than everyone. Needed a reminder of exactly what he is. Lieutenant Joel Rankin chuckled, leaning back in his chair. With his military short hair and perpetually tense posture, he carried himself like the soldier he'd been before Coldwater. Inmates are getting soft. When I started here, they knew their place. Exactly, Kincaid nodded emphatically. My daddy worked Parchman Farm 30 years. He said you gotta break one occasionally to keep the rest in line. Several guards nodded, their agreement. Monroe, sitting at the edge of the group, stared into his coffee cup. Problem is this new generation, Rankin continued, eyes flicking briefly toward Monroe. Think these animals have rights. Think we're supposed to rehabilitate them. He pronounced the word with disgust. Got that right, Kincaid said. Half these new COs would piss themselves in a real situation, like when Jackson tried to jump me in the shower block last year. Wasn't much left of him after Seg, another guard commented, smirking. That's right, Kincaid grinned. Rehabilitated his ass real good. The radio on Rankin's belt crackled. Lieutenant Rankin to administration. Please, Lieutenant Rankin to administration. Rankin stood, adjusting his belt. Warden wants updates on the contraband sweep. He clapped Kincaid on the shoulder. Keep educating the rookie. Make sure he understands how things work around here. After Rankin left, Kincaid's eyes settled on Monroe. You've been mighty quiet, college boy. Something on your mind? Monroe straightened. No, sir. Just listening. Smart. Kincaid leaned forward. First rule of Coldwater, there's us and there's them. You start forgetting which side you're on, you won't last long. Warden Cheryl Dawes smoothed her blazer as the department heads filed into the conference room. At 48, with her sleek bob and carefully maintained appearance, she looked more corporate executive than prison administrator. Precisely the image Coldwater Correctional Partners wanted for their Mississippi flagship facility. "Let's make this quick," she began once Rankin had taken his seat. "I've got a conference call with the board at 11. She gestured to the stack of folders before her. "Incident reports are up 28% from last quarter, particularly use of force documentation." "Ma'am, if I may," Rankin interjected, "we've had an influx of gang members from the state system. More aggressive elements require more aggressive management." "What I require, Lieutenant," Dawes replied coolly, "is a facility that doesn't attract lawsuits. Correctional Partners hired me to clean up Coldwater's image. That means reducing reportable incidents, not explaining them away." She opened the top folder. 3 pending suits from inmates alleging excessive force. 1 claiming medical neglect. And now I hear there was some kind of incident in the cafeteria yesterday? The room went quiet. Finally, Rankin spoke. "Minor disciplinary issue. Nothing worth your attention." "Is that so?" Dawes fixed him with a look. "Because I've received information that Sergeant Kincaid may have behaved inappropriately toward an inmate during meal service." "With all due respect, Warden," Rankin replied, voice hardening, "if we write up officers every time they put an inmate in his place, we'll be down to skeleton crew by month's end." Dawes closed the folder. "I'm not interested in writing anyone up, Lieutenant. I'm interested in running a profitable prison without negative publicity. That requires control of the inmates and the staff." She glanced around the table. "Remind your officers that cameras don't just keep inmates honest. They also protect us from unfounded accusations." After the meeting dispersed, Dawes called Rankin back. When they were alone, her professional smile faded. "Listen carefully, Joel. I don't care how Kincaid or anyone else maintains order. What I care about is documentation. If incidents occur off camera with no witnesses, they effectively didn't happen." She straightened a pen on her desk. "Make sure your people understand that distinction." Rankin nodded, a slight smile forming. "Perfectly clear, ma'am." As darkness fell over Coldwater's cell blocks, Marcus lay on his bunk pretending to read while his cellmate watched a small contraband TV with headphones. The day's careful groundwork had been laid. Notes passed, alliances tentatively formed. The careful network he'd spent years cultivating was stirring to life. He'd watched Monroe during dinner, noted how the young guard had avoided Kincaid's table, how his eyes had skimmed over Marcus without quite meeting his gaze. A crack in the wall, perhaps. Not enough yet, but something to work with. Marcus closed his book as the 10-minute warning for lights out sounded. Phase 1 was underway. Building, coalition, documenting abuses, establishing communication channels. But for his plan to work, he needed more than just inmate solidarity. He needed the system to expose itself. And for that, he needed to become the perfect target. In the darkness after lights out, Marcus added to his hidden notebook. Tomorrow, he would begin Phase 2, using himself as bait to draw Kincaid into a trap of his own making. It was risky. Kincaid was dangerous precisely because he was predictable, a man of violence and bigotry who'd never faced consequences. But for the first time in years, time was on Marcus's side, because while Kincaid saw only an inmate who needed to be put in his place, Marcus saw something far more important. A system so confident in its impunity that it no longer bothered to hide its cruelty. And systems like that made mistakes. 5 minutes to closing, Tillman. Marcus looked up from the legal reference book he'd been pretending to study for the past hour. The wall clock read 3:55 p.m. C.O. Parker stood at the library entrance, keys already in hand. "Would it be possible to have 10 more minutes, sir?" Marcus asked, his tone respectful but firm. "I'm researching a precedent for Williams's appeal." Parker hesitated. It was a reasonable request, within regulations. 5 minutes, not a second more. "Thank you, sir." Marcus returned to the book, turning pages with deliberate slowness. The exchange was mundane, forgettable, exactly as Marcus had planned it. For 3 days since the cafeteria incident, he had been meticulously building his trap, each action calculated. Today's move required precision timing. He needed Kincaid, not Parker, to handle the library closing. At exactly 4:05 p.m., Parker's radio crackled. Parker to intake for new arrivals processing. Perfect. Marcus suppressed any reaction as Parker called over to the desk. Time's up, Tillman. Gotta go to intake. Just finishing this paragraph, sir, Marcus replied, not looking up. Parker's discomfort was palpable. He needed to report to intake but couldn't leave the library unattended. I'll call for backup. You start wrapping up. As Parker stepped into the corridor to radio for assistance, Marcus caught Devin Harper's eye from the reading table. Harper gave an almost imperceptible nod. 2 minutes later, their timing was rewarded when Sergeant Kincaid's voice came through the doorway. I got this, Parker. Go handle intake. Marcus could feel the shift in atmosphere as Kincaid entered. The few remaining inmates quickly gathered their materials and filtered toward the exit, all except Harper, who made a show of organizing papers, and 2 others who lingered by the shelves, witnesses, as planned. Library's closed, Tillman, Kincaid barked, striding toward the desk. Or can't you read a clock? Marcus closed his book with deliberate calmness. Officer Parker gave me a few extra minutes to finish research. Officer Parker isn't here. I am. Kincaid's voice carried through the library, ensuring everyone heard. And I said time's up. Marcus began gathering his materials with intentional slowness, not overtly defiant but not immediately compliant either. Just enough resistance to provoke Kincaid without giving him clear grounds for discipline. Did you hear me, boy? Kincaid stepped closer. Yes, sir, Marcus replied, still organizing his papers. Just collecting these materials. Kincaid slammed his hand on the desk. Now means now. From the doorway, C.O. Monroe appeared, relief duty as scheduled. His young face registered the tension immediately. Everything okay in here, Sergeant? Fine, Kincaid snapped without turning, just reminding Tillman who runs this place. Marcus stood, materials neatly stacked, and looked directly at Kincaid. I'm ready now, sir. Something in Marcus's steady gaze, the lack of fear, perhaps, seemed to fuel Kincaid's anger. You think you're special, don't you? Think the rules don't apply to you? No, sir. Marcus replied evenly. I believe rules should apply to everyone. The implications hung in the air between them. Kincaid's face darkened. Out now. Kincaid moved around the desk, deliberately bumping into Marcus with his shoulder. The contact was hard enough to knock Marcus back a step. Marcus regained his balance, then reached for his papers. May I take these legal documents to my cell, as per policy DC 42? Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. It was the perfect trigger, invoking a policy number, highlighting his knowledge of the rules. Kincaid's face flushed as he grabbed Marcus by the front of his uniform shirt. You quotin' policy to me, nigger, he hissed, then shoved Marcus hard, against the metal shelving. The impact knocked books to the floor and sent pain shooting through Marcus's shoulder and back. The racial slur echoed in the sudden silence. In the doorway, Monroe stood frozen. Harper half rose from his seat, but Marcus caught his eye with a warning look. Not now. This is what we wanted. Sir? Marcus managed, his voice tight with pain but level. I'm not resisting. The hell you're not, Kincaid snarled, his hand still fisted in Marcus's shirt. You've been pushing since day one, acting like you're better than everyone. Time. You learned your place. In his peripheral vision, Marcus saw one of the lingering inmates shift position, Antonio Rivera, Vasquez's lieutenant from C Block, getting a better angle to witness everything. Sergeant, Monroe finally spoke, his voice wavering. I can escort Tillman back to his cell. Kincaid seemed to suddenly remember they weren't alone. He released Marcus with another shove, sending him stumbling back against the shelving again. Get him out of my sight, Kincaid ordered Monroe. Then glaring at the other inmates, library's closed. Everyone out now. As Monroe led Marcus from the library, neither spoke. But Marcus noticed the younger guard's eyes darting to the growing bruise on his shoulder, where his uniform had torn slightly against the metal shelving edge. More importantly, he saw Monroe's gaze flick toward the security camera in the corridor, the one that couldn't see into the library itself, but would have captured their exit. Wondering if it recorded Officer Monroe, Marcus thought. Good. Keep wondering. Hold still, Nurse Boone murmured, gently probing the discolored area on Marcus's shoulder and upper back. Nasty bruise, but nothing's broken. Marcus sat on the examination table in the medical unit, shirt off, revealing both the fresh injury and older scars. Reminders of previous lessons in Coldwater's particular brand of correction. I tripped against the library shelving, he recited, the official explanation he'd given when Monroe brought him to medical. Boone's eyes met his briefly. Of course you did. She continued her examination, her touch professional but careful. Must have been quite a fall to leave a bruise this shape. Her fingers traced what was clearly the outline of a hand. The door opened, and Monroe stepped in. Warden wants an update on Tillman's condition. Boone straightened, expression neutral. Taking photographs for his medical file, standard procedure for injuries. She held up a small digital camera. I was just about to document the bruising pattern. Monroe's eyes widened slightly. Is that necessary? Absolutely, Boone replied calmly. Medical documentation protects everyone. Inmates from abuse and officers from false accusations. Her gaze held Monroe's. Wouldn't you agree, officer? After a moment, Monroe nodded. I'll tell the warden you're following protocol. When the door closed behind him, Boone resumed photographing the injury from multiple angles. You know what you're doing, Marcus observed quietly. 23 years here, Mr. Tillman. She lowered the camera. I've learned when to look away and when to keep records. She attached the camera to her computer, downloading the images. Though I wonder if you know what you're doing. Provoking Kincaid is a dangerous game. Marcus said nothing, watching as she created a separate folder on her desktop labeled Equipment Inventory, and moved the photos there, not in his official medical file, but saved nonetheless. I'll give you some anti-inflammatory cream, she said loudly, for the benefit of anyone who might be listening outside. Then, much softer, whatever you're planning, be careful. Men like Kincaid don't lose gracefully. Warden Dawes looked up from the incident report with a carefully neutral expression. So you're saying inmate Tillman became verbally combative when asked to leave the library? Lieutenant Rankin stood at parade rest beside Kincaid in the warden's office. Sergeant Kincaid followed protocol for an uncooperative inmate. Minimal force was used to ensure compliance. And the injury? Dawes asked. He lost balance and fell against the shelving, Kincaid answered smoothly. If anything, I prevented a worse fall by controlling his movement. Dawes turned to Monroe, who stood awkwardly by the door. Officer Monroe, you witnessed this? Monroe swallowed visibly. I arrived at the end of the incident, ma'am. But you escorted Tillman to medical, she pressed. Yes, ma'am. And did he make any accusations against Sergeant Kincaid? Monroe hesitated. No, ma'am, he said he tripped. I see. The warden leaned back in her chair. So we have an inmate who admits he fell, and officers who confirm that account. She tapped her pen against the report. Yet somehow this has become an issue requiring my attention. Nurse Boone took photographs, Monroe blurted out, of the injury. The room went silent. Kincaid's head snapped toward Monroe, eyes narrowing. Standard medical documentation, Rankin interjected smoothly, for liability purposes. Dawes studied Monroe for a long moment. Officer Monroe, you've been at Coldwater for what, a month? 3 weeks, ma'am. 3 weeks, she repeated. Barely time to learn our procedures, yet you seem concerned about a routine incident. Her voice hardened slightly. Let me be clear about how things work here. We have 643 inmates, many of them violent offenders. Maintaining order sometimes requires firm handling. Yes, ma'am, Monroe replied stiffly. If you have specific allegations of misconduct, I need to know now. Dawes's gaze was penetrating. Do you? The unspoken message was clear. Choose your side carefully. After a long moment, Monroe shook his head. No, ma'am. No allegations. Good. Dawes closed the folder. Then this matter is resolved. Inmate Tillman tripped while being escorted from the library after hours. The medical documentation supports our duty of care. She looked at each officer in turn. I trust there won't be further incidents requiring my intervention. As they filed out of her office, Kincaid bumped Monroe's shoulder in the corridor. Smart choice, rookie. You'll learn how things work around here. Monroe said nothing, but his hands trembled slightly as he walked away. Later that night, in the quiet of his apartment 15 miles from Coldwater, Eli Monroe sat at his kitchen table with a notebook open before him. He'd never kept a journal before, but something compelled him to document what he'd witnessed. He wrote about the cafeteria incident, about Kincaid's casual cruelty, about Marcus Tillman's eyes, not hateful or aggressive, but watchful, intent, as though mapping every detail for future reference. Monroe described the way Kincaid had slammed Marcus into the shelving, the racial slur that had accompanied the violence. He wrote about his own silence, his failure to intervene, the sick feeling in his stomach as he'd escorted an injured man to medical while pretending not to notice the hand-shaped bruise forming on dark skin. What kind of person am I becoming? He wrote, the question hanging unanswered on the page. He couldn't submit an official report, not without ending his career before it began. But he could keep this record, this private testimony. Perhaps someday it would matter. Perhaps someday he would find the courage to speak. As he closed the journal, Monroe's phone chimed with a text message from Lieutenant Rankin. Mandatory staff meeting tomorrow. Aero 600. Discussion of inmate behavioral management. Monroe stared at the message, a chill settling over him. The translation was clear enough. This is how we close ranks. This is how we silence doubt. In his cell, Marcus lay awake, mentally cataloging the day's events. The bruise throbbed beneath his prison-issue shirt, a badge of calculated sacrifice. Each wince of pain reminded him of what was at stake, not just for himself, but for hundreds of men trapped in Coldwater's machinery of degradation. Phase 2 had succeeded beyond expectation. Kincaid had taken the bait, escalating from psychological to physical abuse. Evidence now existed outside the usual channels: Boone's hidden photographs, Monroe's troubled conscience, the testimonies of inmate witnesses who would spread the word through Coldwater's invisible network. But the most valuable outcome was something less tangible: doubt. Doubt in Monroe's eyes as he'd escorted Marcus to medical, doubt in Boone's deliberate documentation, small cracks in the institutional facade that would only widen under pressure. Marcus slipped his hand beneath the mattress, retrieving his notebook to update the plan. Phase 3 would be the most dangerous yet. Collective resistance that would force Coldwater's administration to either acknowledge the abuse or reveal the depth of their complicity. The system survives on silence, he wrote. Our voices are the weapons they fear most. By morning count, everyone in Coldwater knew about the library incident. The details spread through the prison's ecosystem with remarkable precision. Kincaid's racial slur, the physical assault, the hand-shaped bruise on Marcus Tillman's shoulder. In a place where rumors typically distorted with each retelling, the consistency of this story was itself a testament to Marcus's growing influence. As inmates filed into the prison laundry for the morning shift, the atmosphere was charged with a tension the guards could feel but couldn't quite identify. Conversations died when officers approached. Men who normally avoided eye contact with each other now exchanged brief, meaningful glances. At the industrial washing machines, Eduardo Vasquez, leader of the Hispanic inmates in C Block, found himself working alongside Devin Harper. Your man Tillman got balls, Vasquez muttered, barely audible above the machinery. Question is, what happens next? Harper kept his focus on loading sheets. Next is we follow the plan. No individual heroics. My people are asking why we should trust a black plan, Vasquez countered. Kincaid's crew doesn't just target your guys. It's not a black plan, Harper replied evenly. It's a Coldwater plan, and it only works if we stick together. Vasquez considered this, then gave a slight nod. Water's been cold for too long, maybe it's time to heat things up. 20 minutes later, when the signal came, a simple cough repeated 3 times. Every inmate in the laundry simultaneously stopped working. No dramatic announcements, no raised voices. They simply set down their tasks and sat on the floor, hands visible in their laps. "What the hell?" C.O. Wilson, supervising the detail, stepped forward. "Get back to work now." No one moved. No one spoke. The silence was more unnerving than any shouting could have been. Wilson keyed his radio. "I need backup in laundry. We've got a situation." When Lieutenant Rankin arrived with 3 additional officers, he surveyed the scene with narrowed eyes. 34 inmates representing every racial group in Coldwater sat in disciplined silence. "Who's the ringleader?" Rankin demanded. Wilson shook his head. They all just stopped at once. Rankin moved through the seated men, looking for someone to single out. "This ends now. Anyone not back at their station in 10 seconds faces disciplinary segregation." No one moved. 10, 9. Still nothing. 8, 7. In the tense silence, someone began to hum. The melody was faint at first, nearly imperceptible, but unmistakable to anyone who recognized old freedom songs. Within moments, the humming spread, becoming a current that passed through the seated men, white, black, Latino, united in this simple, non-violent defiance. Rankin's face darkened. "Lockdown. Everyone back to their cells. This whole block loses yard privileges. For a week." As guards began moving through to escort inmates out, the men rose without resistance, maintaining their silence except for the humming that continued until the last man left the laundry. In the maintenance shed behind the vocational training building, Jamal Washington gripped a sharpened piece of metal in his palm, the makeshift weapon concealed against his wrist. "Kincaid's on inspection rotation today," he muttered to the small group gathered around him. "Comes through here at 11, always alone. We take him down, send a message." "Put it away." Devin Harper's massive frame filled the doorway. Washington turned, defiance in his stance. "This ain't your call, Big D." That guard crossed the line. "With Tillman. Blood needs blood." Harper stepped closer, his voice low but carrying authority. "This isn't about Tillman. It's about all of us. You stab a guard, they lock down the entire prison. Everything we've built falls apart." "So we just take it?" Washington challenged. "Let them spit in our food, call us niggers, knock us around, and we what? Sit down and hum?" Harper closed the distance between them, not threatening but insistent. "The plan is working. Today in laundry, we showed them something they've never seen. Unity. You think that doesn't scare them more than a shank?" Washington hesitated. "This is what they want," Harper continued. "An excuse to justify the beatings, the isolation, the extra time added to sentences. You give them that. You give them power." The tension stretched between them until Washington slowly lowered the sharpened metal. "So what do we do instead?" Harper held out his hand. "We trust the plan. Nonviolence doesn't mean weakness. It means being smarter than they expect." After a long moment, Washington placed the makeshift weapon in Harper's palm. "This better work, D, 'cause my patience has limits." "So does Kincaid's," Harper replied, pocketing the shank. "And his are a lot closer to breaking than ours." Warden Dawes stood at her office window, watching the unusual scene in the yard below. Despite recreational privileges being revoked, for the laundry workers, the men who did have yard access were behaving strangely, walking the perimeter in perfect silence, maintaining exact distance from each other, creating a human circle that slowly rotated counterclockwise. "What am I looking at, Lieutenant?" she asked as Rankin entered her office. "Coordinated protest, ma'am," Rankin replied. "It started with the work stoppage in laundry. spread to food service refusing to serve the officers' meals, and now this, whatever this is. How many in segregation so far? That's just it, Rankin said, frustration evident. We can't isolate ringleaders because there aren't any. They're all participating equally and they're not breaking any specific rules. They're just collectively resistant. Dawes turned from the window. This isn't spontaneous, Joel. Someone's organizing this. Tillman, Rankin replied immediately. Has to be. Since Kincaid put him in his place in the library, the whole population's been acting out. Then why isn't Tillman in segregation? No direct evidence linking him to the protests. He's being careful. Dawes tapped her manicured nails against her desk. This is exactly what corporate was concerned about when they sent me here. Coldwater can't afford another lawsuit or media attention. She fixed Rankin with a look. Find me something on Tillman, and in the meantime, keep Kincaid away from him. With respect, ma'am, Kincaid's one of our most experienced officers. And his experience is becoming a liability. She picked up a folder. I've received 3 separate incident reports involving Sergeant Kincaid in the past week, all concerning excessive force. The pattern is becoming difficult to ignore. The men respect him because he maintains discipline, Rankin argued. The men fear him, Dawes corrected, and fear without control becomes rebellion. That's what we're seeing in the yard right now. She sat down at her desk. One more thing, that new CO, Monroe. What's your assessment? Rankin's expression darkened. Soft, uncertain. Witnessed the library incident and has been avoiding Kincaid since. Has he filed any complaints? No, ma'am. But he hasn't explicitly backed our version either. Dawes considered this. Bring him to me. I want to get his loyalty on record before this situation escalates further. Sergeant Kincaid stalked through the corridor of D Block, his usual swagger edged with something new. A nervous energy, a hypervigilance that had the inmates exchanging glances behind his back. Everyone sensed the change. Kincaid was rattled. Cell inspection, he barked, stopping at a cell that housed James Peterson, a young inmate serving 5 years for drug possession. Up against the wall, Peterson. The young man complied, but with a deliberateness that bordered on insolence. When Kincaid entered the cell, Peterson maintained eye contact a fraction of a second too long before turning to face the wall. You got a problem with me, boy? Kincaid demanded. No, sir, Peterson replied, the honorific somehow stripped of respect. Kincaid began tossing the cell, upending the thin mattress, dumping personal items on the floor. Funny how you all suddenly developed attitudes this week. Peterson remained silent, facing the wall as required. I asked you a question, inmate. Kincaid moved closer. No, sir. No problem, sir, Peterson repeated, his voice neutral. Something about the calm response triggered Kincaid. He grabbed Peterson's shoulder, spinning him around. You think I don't know what's happening? You think I don't see what Tillman's doing? Peterson's eyes widened slightly. I don't know what you're talking about, sir. The hell you don't. Kincaid shoved him hard against the wall. All you inmates think you're so smart with your silent treatment and your work slowdowns. Let me tell you something. I've been breaking men like you for 15 years. CO Monroe appeared in the doorway, surprised to find Kincaid conducting inspections alone. Sergeant, everything okay in here? Kincaid didn't turn around, keeping Peterson pinned. Fine. Just explaining the facts of life to our friend here. Monroe hesitated, taking in the scene. The disheveled cell, Peterson's barely concealed fear, Kincaid's aggressive posture. Lieutenant Rankin's looking for you. Says it's urgent. Kincaid finally released Peterson, turning to Monroe with obvious suspicion. Is that right? Funny he didn't radio me directly. Monroe met his gaze steadily. Just passing along the message, sir. After a tense moment, Kincaid brushed past Monroe into the corridor. Clean up this mess, he ordered Peterson, then stalked away. Monroe lingered briefly. You okay? He asked Peterson quietly. The inmate nodded, surprised by the question. As Monroe turned to leave, he noticed the cell's security camera in the upper corner. Unlike the library, this confrontation would have been recorded. Officer Monroe, Do you understand why I've asked to see you? Warden Dawes sat behind her desk, her posture perfect, expression unreadable. No, ma'am, Monroe replied, trying to keep his nervousness from showing. You've been at Coldwater for nearly a month now. That's enough time to understand how we operate. She folded her hands on the desk. I need to know where your loyalties lie. Monroe shifted uncomfortably. I'm loyal to my duty, ma'am. A commendable but vague answer. Dawes slid a document across the desk. This is a statement confirming your account of the incident between Sergeant Kincaid and inmate Tillman in the library. It states that you witnessed Tillman being verbally aggressive and resisting orders, necessitating physical intervention by Sergeant Kincaid. Monroe stared at the paper. That's not what I saw, ma'am. It's the official account, Dawes replied smoothly, supported by Lieutenant Rankin and Sergeant Kincaid. But it's not accurate. Accuracy, Officer Monroe, is often a matter of perspective. Dawes leaned forward slightly. In corrections, unity among staff is paramount. Without it, we lose control. Without control, people get hurt, including officers like yourself. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. I'm not asking you to lie, Dawes continued, her tone softening. I'm asking you to consider the greater good. One unfortunate incident, perhaps mishandled by an experienced officer under stress, versus the safety and functioning of an entire institution. Monroe looked down at the statement, the pen lying beside it. What happens if I don't sign? Nothing immediately dramatic, Dawes replied. But you'd find yourself increasingly isolated. Assignments in the most difficult areas. No backup when you call for it. Eventually an incident would occur. They always do. And you'd find yourself without witnesses to support your version of events. Monroe felt sick. That sounds like a threat, ma'am. It's a reality, Dawes corrected. One I'm trying to help you avoid. She gestured to the paper. Take it with you. Think about your future here. I'll expect your decision by tomorrow. Rough day? Nurse Boone didn't look up from her medication inventory as Monroe entered the medical unit. You could say that. He slumped against the counter, the unsigned statement folded in his pocket like a burning coal. Boone finished her count before finally turning to him. Let me guess. They've asked you to put something in writing about what you didn't see in the library. Monroe stared at her. How did you know? Because that's how Coldwater works. She removed her reading glasses. They isolate the potential problem, then offer a choice that isn't really a choice. The warden wants me to sign a statement, saying Tillman was aggressive and Kincaid was justified. Monroe ran a hand through his hair. If I don't, life gets very difficult. Boone finished for him. She studied him for a moment, then made a decision. Moving to her computer, she opened a drawer and removed a small flash drive. I've been at Coldwater longer than most of the guards. Long enough to see patterns. Long enough to keep records. She held out the drive. Medical files. Injuries consistent with excessive force. Photographs. Witness statements from inmates who later withdrew them. 19 cases over 5 years. 7. Involving Kincaid directly. Monroe didn't take it immediately. Why are you showing me this? Because sometimes we reach a point where silence becomes complicity. She placed the drive on the counter. I'm not telling you what to do with this information, but if you're looking for truth to balance against the warden's perspective, it's right there. After a long moment, Monroe picked up the flash drive. If they find out you have this, I've protected my job by keeping quiet for years, Boone replied, her voice suddenly tired. Maybe it's time I protected something more important. In his cell that night, Marcus sat on his bunk, carefully massaging his bruised shoulder. Despite the pain, a sense of cautious satisfaction filled him. Phase 3 was unfolding better than he had anticipated. Collective resistance spreading throughout Coldwater without a single command from him. The beauty of his plan lay in its distributed nature. No central leadership to target. No single point of failure. Each inmate participating knew only their small part, with Harper, Vasquez, and a few others serving as connectors between groups. The system couldn't isolate what was essentially everywhere at once. Marcus heard the jangling of keys, evening count approaching, and tucked his notebook away. The day's events had accelerated his timeline. Kincaid's confrontation with Peterson, captured on camera. Monroe's visible moral struggle. Boone's quiet documentation. The pieces were moving into place. As the guard passed his cell, Marcus allowed himself a rare moment of hope. Systems like Coldwater thrived on isolation, keeping inmates divided by race, by block, by criminal history. But those divisions were breaking down now, replaced by something the administration truly feared: solidarity. Tomorrow would bring the next escalation, a coordinated test of the system's pressure points. And with it, the moment when Coldwater would have to choose between acknowledging its failings or doubling down on brutality. Either way, the truth would be forced into the light. The security camera footage from D Block played on the monitor, in Warden Dawes' office. Though the audio was poor, Kincaid's aggressive posture as he shoved inmate Peterson against the cell wall was unmistakable. "Unfortunate timing," Dawes said, pausing the video. 3 separate incidents in 1 week, all caught on camera. Lieutenant Rankin stood rigidly beside Kincaid, both men facing the warden across her desk. Peterson was hiding contraband. Sergeant Kincaid was conducting a proper search. Was he? Dawes rewound the footage, highlighting Kincaid's aggressive entry into the cell. "Because what I see is an officer who's becoming a liability." Kincaid leaned forward. "With all due respect, Warden, these inmates are testing us. They're organizing, and if we don't shut it down hard—" "Sergeant Kincaid," Dawes interrupted, her voice like ice. "While I appreciate your input, the fact remains that your methods have created a situation I now have to manage." She closed the laptop. "Effective immediately, you're on administrative leave pending review." "This is bullshit," Kincaid exploded. "You're giving in to these animals." "That's enough," Dawes snapped. "I'm not suspending you because I disagree with your philosophy, Sergeant. I'm suspending you because you've been sloppy enough to get caught on camera 3 times in 1 week. Now get out of my office and surrender your gear to Lieutenant Rankin." When Kincaid had stormed out, Dawes turned to Rankin. "I need this situation contained, Lieutenant. Whatever's happening with the inmates needs to end. Now." Rankin nodded grimly. "I understand, ma'am. And Joel," she added as he turned to go. "Make it clear to the other officers we handle this internally. No one speaks to anyone outside Coldwater about what's happening here." The white wall of silence, Rankin said with a tight smile. "Don't worry, Warden." Message received. By noon, every guard in Coldwater knew about Kincaid's suspension. By evening, the administration's response began taking shape. "Cell block inspection." The announcement boomed through F Block's speaker system at 2:13 a.m., jolting inmates from sleep. "Everyone out! Line up!" Half-dressed men stumbled from their cells to stand against the wall as guards stormed through, ransacking rooms, dumping personal items onto the floor, confiscating anything remotely questionable. The same scene played out simultaneously in C Block, where Vasquez and his allies were housed. In the library the next morning, Marcus listened carefully as inmates reported what had happened. "They trashed everything, man," a young inmate from C Block whispered. "Took letters from my kids, said they needed to review them for coded messages." Another added, "Confiscated medicine from Wilson. Guy's diabetic, but they said they needed to verify his prescription." Marcus nodded calmly, shelving books as they spoke to maintain the appearance of normal activity. "What about unity, everyone? Holding together?" "So far," the first inmate replied, "but they're trying to find informants. Offering deals, protection, extra privileges. Some guys might crack if this keeps up." "Tell everyone to stay disciplined," Marcus said quietly. "Document everything. Remember what we're fighting for." As the inmates drifted away, C.O. Parker approached the desk. "Tillman, Warden wants to see you." Marcus felt a ripple of unease. This deviation from his carefully calculated plan was concerning, but he kept his expression neutral. "Yes, sir." Warden Dawes didn't invite Marcus to sit. He stood before her desk, hands clasped behind his back as she reviewed a file. "Mr. Tillman," she began, looking up, "I've been examining your record. Incarcerated 3 years ago following a protest that turned violent. No disciplinary issues until recently. Prison librarian, jailhouse lawyer." She closed the file. "Quite the model inmate. I try to make productive use of my time, ma'am," Marcus replied evenly. "Indeed." She leaned back in her chair. "So perhaps you can explain why, since your interaction with Sergeant Kincaid, my prison has experienced widespread disruption." Marcus maintained his composure. "I'm not sure what you mean, Warden." "I think you do." Dawes stood, circling her desk. "Work stoppages, coordinated silent protests, inmates from rival groups suddenly unified, all coincidentally beginning after you and Kincaid had your little confrontation." "Correlation isn't causation, Warden," Marcus said carefully. "Perhaps these issues reflect larger concerns within the facility." Dawes' smile didn't reach her eyes. "Let me be direct, Mr. Tillman. I know you're behind this. I don't know how, and I don't know why now, but I recognize organized resistance when I see it." She moved closer. "I'm placing you in administrative segregation while we investigate your involvement in disrupting prison operations. If you cooperate, identify the other organizers, explain the communication methods, I'll consider reducing your isolation to 72 hours. Otherwise, you're looking at 30 days minimum." Marcus absorbed this, calculating rapidly. Solitary was always a possibility in his plan, but timing was crucial. "On what grounds am I being isolated, Warden? I've broken no rules." "Inciting prison disruption," she replied smoothly. "The evidence is circumstantial but sufficient for administrative action." 2 guards appeared at the door. "Consider my offer, Mr. Tillman," Dawes said as they moved to escort him out. "Cooperation would benefit everyone." As Marcus was led away, he caught sight of Devin Harper watching from across the common area. Their eyes met briefly, just long, enough for Marcus to give an almost imperceptible nod. "Stay the course." The segregation cell measured 8 by 10 feet. Concrete walls, a steel toilet sink combination, a thin mattress on a metal frame bolted to the floor. No window, save for the small shatterproof glass in the door. The isolation was immediate and total. Marcus sat on the edge of the mattress, controlling his breathing as he had during previous stints in solitary. The first hours were always the hardest. The abrupt sensory deprivation, the disorientation of timelessness, the suffocating smallness of the space. Most inmates broke during these initial hours, their minds racing toward panic. Marcus had learned to do the opposite, to slow down, to turn inward, to transform confinement into a form of contemplative discipline. When a guard delivered his dinner tray through the slot, Marcus noted the time on the wall clock outside his cell. 6 p.m., 1 day down, potentially 29 to go. He examined the food, a sandwich, an apple, a small carton of milk. Standard segregation fare designed to be eaten without utensils. But what caught his attention was the napkin, slightly thicker than usual, folded precisely. Once alone, Marcus carefully unfolded it. Inside was a brief message written in tiny, neat script. "Stay strong. Unity holding. D." Harper had found a way to communicate, which meant the plan could continue even with Marcus in isolation. Marcus ate slowly, methodically pulling apart the sandwich. Between 2 slices of bread, he found what he'd hoped for, a tiny pencil stub, no more than an inch long, the kind used for marking golf scores, too small to be detected in routine searches, too dull to be considered a weapon. That night, after lights out, Marcus began writing on toilet paper, coding messages to be smuggled out during his weekly medical check. One to Harper with updated instructions. One to a paralegal he'd corresponded with at the Mississippi Prisoners' Rights Coalition. And one to the journalist whose business card he'd memorized months ago, preparing for exactly this moment. The isolation that was meant to silence him would instead become his platform. "They're breaking protocol," Nurse Boone told Monroe as they walked toward the segregation unit for Marcus's mandatory health check. Tillman's been in isolation for 5 days with no hearing, no charges filed. Just pending investigation. Monroe glanced around nervously. Since Kincaid's suspension, the atmosphere among the guards had changed. Suspicious glances. Closed conversations that stopped when he approached. Rankin watching his every move. "I have to escort you for the exam," Monroe said quietly. "Lieutenant's orders." Boone nodded, understanding the subtext. "Of course, procedure." When they reached Marcus's cell, Monroe unlocked the door, then took up position just inside, while Boone conducted her examination. Marcus sat calmly on the edge of his bed, showing no signs of the psychological deterioration common in segregation inmates. "Blood pressure's normal," Boone announced, writing on her clipboard. "Any dizziness? Difficulty sleeping?" "No, ma'am," Marcus replied. "Any concerns about your treatment?" she asked, the standard question taking on new meaning in the current context. Marcus's eyes flicked briefly to Monroe before returning to Boone. "Truth always finds a way out, doesn't it? Even when the system tries to contain it." Boone maintained, her professional demeanor. "Indeed, the body communicates what the mind knows even when we try to suppress it." Monroe shifted uncomfortably, aware they were speaking in code but uncertain of the exact message. As Boone checked Marcus's pupils, her body briefly shielded him from Monroe's direct view. In that moment, something passed between them. A small, folded paper, deftly transferred during the examination. "Officer Monroe," Boone said, turning, "would you mind checking if my medical card is still outside? I think I left my stethoscope." It was an obvious pretense, but Monroe found himself nodding. "Yes, ma'am." When he stepped outside, Boone quickly whispered to Marcus, "Harper says they're planning a major shakedown. Documentation is getting dangerous." "Tell him to hold the line," Marcus murmured back. "Monroe, is he trustworthy?" "Undecided," Boone replied. "Scared, but hasn't signed Dawes's statement yet." When Monroe returned, Boone was already packing up her kit. "All finished here. Inmate is in satisfactory condition." As they left the segregation unit, Boone spoke casually. "Officer Monroe, I still haven't received that form you were supposed to drop off. The one about medication side effects?" "I haven't filled it out yet," Monroe replied, catching her meaning immediately. "Well, don't wait too long. Some decisions can't be postponed indefinitely. We need to make an example," Lieutenant Rankin told the assembled officers in the staff briefing room. "The inmates think Kincaid's suspension means we're backing down. They're wrong." 20 guards nodded in agreement, their faces grim. Notably absent was C.O. Monroe, assigned to perimeter duty during the meeting. "Tomorrow at 500 we conduct simultaneous shakedowns of all blocks," Rankin continued. "I want cells stripped bare. Confiscate anything remotely questionable. Written. Materials, photos, any potential communication tools." "Sir," one of the newer officers asked, "what about medical items, religious materials?" "Everything gets reviewed," Rankin replied flatly. "We'll sort legitimate items later. For now, we show zero tolerance." After outlining the operation, Rankin held up a hand. "One more thing. There's been talk about what happened with Kincaid. Questions about procedure, about whether the administration has our backs." His gaze swept the room. "Let me be clear. We protect our own. What happens inside Coldwater stays inside Coldwater. Anyone who can't abide by that understanding should resign now." The silence was heavy with implicit threat. "Good," Rankin nodded. "Dismissed." As the officers filed out, Rankin called to a senior guard. "Keep an eye on Monroe. Something's off with him." "You think he's sympathizing with the inmates?" "I think he's weak," Rankin replied. "And weakness is dangerous." Devin Harper knew something was wrong the moment he entered the day room. The normal background tension of prison life had shifted to something sharper, more immediate. Guards, watching too intently. Inmates clustered in tight, anxious groups. He made his way to where Vasquez sat playing cards with several others. "They're planning something," Vasquez said without looking up. "Word came down from medical." Harper nodded slightly. "How's morale?" "Fracturing," Vasquez admitted. "Guys are scared. Segregation's filling up. Personal items disappearing in inspections. Some are talking about hitting back. That's what they want," Harper said firmly. "An excuse to crack down harder." He lowered his voice further. "Marcus sent instructions. Document everything. Stay nonviolent. The outside world is starting to pay attention." "Easy for him to say from segregation," Vasquez countered. "My guys are asking why we're still playing by his rules when they're clearly not playing by any." Harper understood the frustration. 5 days of escalating pressure had tested even his resolve. "Because their way leads back to where we started. Our way leads somewhere new." From across the day room, Jamal Washington approached, his expression tense. "D, we got a problem. Wilson from B Block is talking about jumping a guard tonight. Says we need to show we're not weak." Harper felt a flash of anger. "Who's the target?" "Monroe. Says he's vulnerable. Easy to isolate." "Damn it." Harper stood. "Where's Wilson now?" "Weight pile." Harper moved quickly, Vasquez following. If violence erupted now, everything Marcus had built would collapse. The administration would have its justification for a complete lockdown, for transfer of troublemakers to other facilities, for breaking the fragile coalition forming within Coldwater's walls. More importantly, they'd lose the moral high ground that made their resistance so powerful. The moment they became what the system claimed they were, violent, uncontrollable animal, they would surrender their greatest weapon, the truth. Alone, in his apartment, Eli Monroe stared at his computer screen. The flash drive Nurse Boone had given him plugged into the USB port. He'd spent hours reviewing its contents. Hundreds of photos documenting injuries, medical reports with careful notes about inconsistencies in official explanations, statements from inmates who later retracted their complaints. The evidence was overwhelming, not just against Kincaid, but against an entire system that enabled, covered up, and rewarded abuse. On his kitchen table lay the statement Warden Dawes wanted him to sign, still unsigned. Beside it, his resignation letter, drafted, but not submitted. 2 paths forward, neither without consequence. His phone chimed with a text from Lieutenant Rankin. "All officers report 0430 tomorrow for special operation. Mandatory attendance." Monroe knew what that meant. Mass retaliation against the inmates. A show of force to crush the peaceful resistance. Business as usual at Coldwater. He returned to his computer, opening a browser window. With shaking hands, he navigated to the website for the Southern Center for Human Rights, a legal organization known for prison reform advocacy. Their secure tip line offered anonymous submission of evidence. For 10 minutes, Monroe sat motionless, cursor hovering over the submit button. His career, his safety, his future, all hanging in the balance. Against that, the faces of men being systematically broken by the institution that claimed to correct them. Marcus Tillman in segregation, isolated for organizing nonviolent resistance. Peterson shoved against a wall for a moment's hesitation. Countless others whose stories filled Boone's secret archive. Monroe clicked submit, then sat back, a strange mixture of terror and relief washing over him. There would be no going back now. "We need to talk." Nurse Boone cornered Monroe during his medication rounds the next morning. The pre-dawn shakedowns had gone forward as planned, leaving chaos in their wake. Cells destroyed, inmates' few possessions confiscated or damaged, tension thick enough to cut with a knife. She pulled him into the supply closet, closing the door. "Did you use the flash drive?" Monroe hesitated, then nodded. "Last night. Sent everything to the Southern Center." Boone closed her eyes briefly, exhaling. "You need to be careful now. Dawes is building a case against Tillman, conspiracy charges, additional time. They're trying to make him the scapegoat for everything. We have to get him out of segregation," Monroe said. "Impossible right now," Boone replied, "but we can protect the evidence." She handed him a small envelope. These are copies of medical reports I've kept separate from official files. If anything happens to me or the originals—" "What do you mean, if anything happens?" Monroe asked, alarmed. Boone gave him a weary look. "I've worked here long enough to know how Coldwater protects itself. Just keep those safe." As she turned to leave, Monroe caught her arm. "Why are you doing this? You've kept quiet for years." She was silent for a moment. "Because every night I go home and look in the mirror and I'm running out of excuses for the face looking back." She met his eyes. "Same reason you didn't sign that statement." In his segregation cell, Marcus felt the change before he heard it. A subtle shift in the building's rhythm, a different cadence to the guards' movements in the corridor. Something was happening. When his lunch tray arrived, slid through the Dr. Slot by a guard he didn't recognize, he found another napkin message, this one even more cryptic. "Outside eyes watching. Hold fast." Outside eyes. External scrutiny, the goal he'd been working toward for months. Marcus allowed himself a moment of cautious hope. If Harper had managed to get word to his outside contacts, if Monroe had found the courage to use Boone's evidence, if the peaceful resistance throughout Coldwater had attracted attention, then perhaps the tipping point was approaching. He thought of the men throughout the prison maintaining unity despite increasingly harsh retaliation. Of Harper controlling hotheads like Washington who wanted to resort to violence. Of Boone risking her career to document abuses. Of Monroe trembling on the edge of a moral choice. Individuals acting according to conscience, forming a collective force more powerful than any single leader could inspire. Even in isolation, cut off from direct communication, Marcus could feel the momentum building. The system's response, harsher restrictions, targeted punishment, intimidation, revealed its growing desperation. Its need to reassert control betrayed its fear of what was happening. The truth was finding its way out. One whispered conversation, one documented bruise, one act of peaceful defiance at a time. And against the truth, even Coldwater's walls couldn't hold. "Ms. Boone?" The voice on the phone was female, professional, unfamiliar. Carla Boone sat straighter in her small office, instantly alert. "Yes, who's calling?" "My name is Alicia Mercer, investigative reporter with the Jackson Clarion Ledger. I recently received documentation regarding Coldwater Correctional Facility that I'd like to discuss with you." Boone's heart hammered against her ribs. "I'm sorry, I don't speak to the press about my employment." "I understand your position," Mercer continued smoothly. "But the materials I've received include medical documentation that appears to have originated from your department. Specifically photographs of inmate injuries inconsistent with official reports." Boone closed her office door. "I have no comment. Please don't contact me again. Ms. Boone, I'm pursuing this story with or without your input, but these records show a pattern of abuse that—" "I said no comment." Boone hung up, hand trembling. It had begun. The evidence Monroe submitted was reaching journalists. The wall of silence was cracking. She had just 15 minutes to warn him before her shift started. "A reporter?" Warden Dawes's voice was dangerously controlled as she faced Lieutenant Rankin in her office. "From a major newspaper? Asking about internal disciplinary matters?" "Yes, ma'am. They called this morning requesting comment on allegations of systematic inmate abuse." Dawes pinched the bridge of her nose. "What exactly do they have?" "Unknown. They mentioned photographs and inconsistent medical reports." "Boone," Dawes concluded immediately. "Has to be." Rankin nodded. "Or someone with access to her files. Like that new CO, Monroe." Dawes stood and began pacing. "Corporate is already concerned about our incident rates. If this gains traction—" She trailed off, then straightened her shoulders. "Initiate Protocol 19. Rankin stiffened. "Full documentation review?" "Yes, every incident report, medical file, and disciplinary action for the past 6 months. Anything questionable gets flagged for correction." "That's hundreds of files, Warden." "Then you better get started," Dawes replied coldly. "And Lieutenant, bring Monroe to me. I want him isolated and questioned. Find out what he knows." The cafeteria fell silent as Devin Harper stood from his table, tray untouched, and walked to the disposal area. He dumped his food, placing his tray on the stack, then returned to sit with empty hands before him. Within minutes, others followed. First inmates from his block, then others. No words, no dramatic gestures. Simply dozens of men, then hundreds refusing to eat. C.O. Wilson keyed his radio. "Lieutenant, we've got a situation in the cafeteria." By the time Rankin arrived, more than half the inmates sat before empty places, hands folded on tables, silent and immobile. "What is this?" Rankin demanded. When no one answered, he pointed at Harper. "You, explain." Harper looked up calmly. "Not hungry today, sir." "All of you? Not hungry at the same time?" Harper shrugged slightly. "Food hasn't been agreeing with us lately." Rankin leaned closer. "This stops now. You tell your people to eat, or there will be consequences." "Can't force a man to eat if he isn't hungry, sir," Harper replied evenly. "No rule against that, is there?" The hunger strike spread through every block by dinner, a non-violent protest impossible to punish directly, yet devastating in its symbolism and timing, with journalists now making inquiries. In his segregation cell, Marcus received the news via another napkin message. Hunger strike 90%, outside press calling. His plan was working. The pressure points were aligning perfectly. "Officer Monroe." Warden Dawes gestured to the chair, across from her desk. "Thank you for joining me." Monroe remained standing. "It wasn't presented as optional, ma'am." Rankin stood by the door, arms crossed. "Let's not waste time," Dawes said. "A reporter has contacted Coldwater with allegations stemming from leaked medical documentation you had access to." Monroe kept his expression neutral despite his pounding heart. "Many staff have access to medical files, but not many have refused to sign statements supporting fellow officers," Rankin interjected. "Not many have been seen having private conversations with Nurse Boone." Monroe met Dawes's gaze directly. "Are you accusing me of something, Warden?" "I'm giving you an opportunity to be honest, Officer Monroe. If you've made a mistake, perhaps misunderstanding the context of certain documents, perhaps sharing concerns with unauthorized parties, now is the time to admit it." The threat beneath her reasonable tone was unmistakable. "I haven't shared anything with reporters," Monroe replied truthfully. "The Human Rights Organization wasn't the press, after all. And I haven't signed your statement because it doesn't match what I saw." Dawes's pleasant expression hardened. "You should know that Correctional Partners takes information security very seriously. Breach of confidentiality is grounds for immediate termination and potential legal action." "I understand policies, ma'am. I also understand ethics." "Ethics?" Rankin scoffed. "Where's the ethics in undermining your fellow officers? In siding with inmates against your own people?" Monroe turned to him. "My people are anyone who believes in doing what's right." Dawes stood. "That's enough. Officer Monroe, you're suspended pending investigation into potential policy violations. Surrender your ID and gear to Lieutenant Rankin." As Monroe removed his equipment belt, Dawes added quietly, "You've chosen a dangerous path, Mr. Monroe. I suggest you consider very carefully what happens next." Nurse Boone knew something was wrong when 2 administrative assistants arrived to help organize medical files. Their explanation about standardizing documentation was transparent. They were sanitizing records, removing evidence. When they stepped out for lunch, Boone quickly accessed her computer, copying critical files to a second hidden drive. 17 years of meticulous documentation of abuse couldn't be erased if multiple copies existed. As she finished, Lieutenant Rankin appeared in her doorway. "Ms. Boone, I need you to review a disciplinary report." He handed her a file. Inside was a fabricated incident report claiming Marcus Tillman had assaulted a guard before his segregation placement, justifying both his isolation and potential transfer to maximum security. "This isn't what happened," Boone said, closing the file. "I examined Tillman when he entered segregation. There were no injuries on his hands consistent with striking someone. The report just needs your signature confirming he was medically evaluated. Rankin pressed. The details aren't your concern. I can't sign this. Can't? Or won't? Rankin stepped closer. Like Monroe, you seem confused about where your loyalties should lie. Boone stood her ground. My loyalty is to medical, ethics, and accurate documentation. Your loyalty should be to this institution, Rankin replied, voice hardening. The one that's employed you for over 2 decades. The institution, Lieutenant, or the people running it? Rankin snatched back the file. I'll have the warden talk to you. Maybe she can make the consequences clearer. After he left, Boone quickly removed the hidden drive from her computer. Whatever happened next, the truth would survive. Heard you got yourself suspended, college boy. Monroe froze in the employee parking lot, recognizing Kincaid's voice. Immediately. The suspended guard leaned against Monroe's car, arms crossed. I'm not looking for trouble, Kincaid. No? Seems like you've been finding it anyway. Kincaid pushed off the car and stepped closer. Word is you've been asking questions. Taking the inmate's side. I'm not taking sides, Monroe replied, scanning the lot for witnesses. I'm just trying to do what's right, Kincaid laughed, the sound devoid of humor. Right? There's only one right in places like Coldwater, keeping those animals in line. Everything else is weakness. Is that what you tell yourself to justify spitting in a man's food, shoving inmates into shelves, using racial slurs? Kincaid's smile vanished. You have no idea what it takes to survive in there. 20 years I've walked those tiers. 20 years watching my back, earning respect the only way they understand. Through fear, Monroe said. Not respect. Same thing in there. Kincaid stepped uncomfortably close. But you're learning about fear now, aren't you? Wondering what happens to officers who break the code, who betray their brothers. I haven't betrayed anyone, Kincaid. I just won't lie for you. The warden called me this morning, Kincaid said, his voice dropping. I'm back on shift tomorrow. Full reinstatement. Know why? Because when things get ugly, and they're getting real ugly in there with this hunger strike bullshit, they need men like me. He jabbed a finger into Monroe's chest. But they don't need men like you. Remember that. As Kincaid walked away, Monroe realized his hands were shaking. The system was circling its wagons, preparing to crush resistance by any means necessary. And without his badge, he couldn't warn anyone inside. Marcus heard the change in the guard rotation before seeing it. The heavier footsteps, the sharper jangle of keys, the subtle shift in energy outside his cell door. When Kincaid's face appeared in the small window, Marcus wasn't surprised. Miss me, Tillman? Kincaid's voice came through the door. Special request to handle segregation duty. Thought we could catch up. Marcus remained seated on his bunk, expression neutral. Nothing to say? That's new. Kincaid chuckled. Your little revolution's falling apart out there. Warden's cracking down. That nurse is about to lose her job. Your buddy Monroe's already suspended. A flicker of concern crossed Marcus's face before he could suppress it. Kincaid caught it and grinned. Yeah, your white knight turned out to be a coward after all. Didn't even fight when they took his badge. He slapped the door. Just you and me now, college boy, for the next 8 hours. After Kincaid moved down the corridor, Marcus closed his eyes briefly. If Monroe was suspended and Boone under pressure, the external documentation might be compromised. Everything depended on whether the evidence had already reached outside authorities. 8 days in isolation had tested his resolve, but this was the most dangerous moment yet. With Kincaid reinstated and directly supervising him, the potential for accidents was high. Marcus pulled the small pencil stub from its hiding place in his mattress seam. Time to accelerate the final phase. If Kincaid was back, if the administration was consolidating power, then the moment of maximum vulnerability for Coldwater had arrived. The outside world was watching. Now they needed to see the whole truth. 4 days without food, Mr. Tillman, Warden Dawes said, standing in the open doorway of Marcus's segregation cell. Medical reports concerning dehydration in multiple blocks. Reporters calling my office hourly. She studied him with clinical detachment. You've created quite the situation. Marcus sat on the edge of his thin mattress, noticeably thinner after 11 days in isolation and 4 without food. Yet his eyes remained clear, focused. I haven't created anything, Warden. We both know that's not true. Dawes stepped inside, signaling the accompanying guard to wait outside. This hunger strike is coordinated, disciplined. It has all the hallmarks of your influence. Marcus said nothing. I'll be direct, Dawes continued, lowering her voice. Corporate is concerned about negative publicity. I'm authorized to offer certain accommodations in exchange for ending this disruption. What accommodations? Sergeant Kincaid transferred to another facility. A review of use of force protocols. Perhaps even a reduction in your segregation time. She offered a thin smile. Reasonable compromises. Marcus held her gaze. And the systematic abuse? The fabricated disciplinary reports? The racial targeting? Don't overplay your hand, Dawes warned. I'm offering practical solutions to immediate problems. You're offering bandages for bullet wounds, Marcus replied. This isn't about Kincaid, it's about Coldwater. About private prisons that profit from treating humans like animals. Dawes's expression hardened. Then what do you want? Independent investigation, public records of abuse, accountability that extends beyond scapegoating a single guard. Marcus leaned forward slightly. I want the truth acknowledged. Impossible. Corporate would never. Then we have nothing to discuss. Marcus straightened his back. The hunger strike continues. Dawes studied him, reassessing. You know, I almost admire your conviction, Mr. Tillman. But you're forgetting something crucial. You're still an inmate. Your leverage is temporary. Your freedom non-existent. My freedom was taken, Warden. My dignity wasn't. Marcus's voice remained calm. We both know what's happening now can't be contained within these walls anymore. Dawes moved toward the door. A noble stand. Let's see how it holds when men start collapsing from starvation. She paused. Think carefully, Mr. Tillman. This offer expires in 24 hours. After she left, Marcus closed his eyes briefly. The warden's visit confirmed what he'd hoped. External pressure was mounting. Her willingness to negotiate, however inadequately, revealed cracks in Coldwater's administrative facade. The next 24 hours would be critical. Eli Monroe sat across from 2 people who had introduced themselves as journalists from the Memphis Commercial Appeal. The coffee shop 20 miles from Coldwater was nearly empty at this hour. We appreciate you meeting with us, Mr. Monroe, the woman said. As we mentioned on the phone, we're following up on information received about conditions at Coldwater. Something about their demeanor, too precise, too measured, raised Monroe's suspicions. You don't seem like reporters. The man smiled slightly. Perceptive. We're actually investigators with the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. We thought a more discreet introduction would be safer for you. Monroe's heart raced. DOJ, you're investigating Coldwater? We've received concerning evidence of potential civil rights violations, the woman explained. Medical documentation, testimony from former inmates, and anonymous tips suggesting systematic abuse. We understand you were recently suspended, the man added. After witnessing an incident between a senior officer and an inmate named Marcus Tillman, Monroe hesitated. Speaking to federal investigators would cross a final line, but hadn't he already crossed it by sharing the evidence? I'm not looking to cause trouble, he said carefully. I just couldn't be part of what was happening there. We're not asking you to be a public whistleblower, the woman assured him. Just to verify information we already have. If conditions at Coldwater are as described, federal intervention may be necessary. Monroe thought of Marcus in segregation, of Kincaid's threatening presence, of Nurse Boone's quiet resistance over decades. What do you need to know? Nurse Carla Boone worked methodically in her apartment, preparing the package for overnight delivery. Inside, complete copies of her documentation, organized chronologically with her signed affidavit describing the systematic pattern of abuse and cover-ups at Coldwater. The suspension notice she'd received that afternoon had been inevitable. Administrative leave pending review of professional conduct was Coldwater's way of silencing potential witnesses. But they'd moved too late. The evidence was already beyond their reach. Boone sealed the package addressed to the Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division. After 23 years of quiet complicity, of telling herself she was doing good, by treating injuries she knew were deliberately inflicted, she was finally taking a definitive stand. Whatever happened next, she would face it knowing she had finally chosen the right side. The corridor near the staff locker room was deserted when Kincaid cornered Monroe against the wall, forearm pressed against his throat. "I know it was you," Kincaid hissed, face inches from Monroe's. "You leaked those files, didn't you? Trying to bring down the whole system." Despite his suspension, Monroe had returned to retrieve personal items from his locker. Now he struggled for breath as Kincaid's arm pressed harder. "The feds are sniffing around because of you," Kincaid continued, eyes wild with rage. 20 years I've given to this job, and now they're talking about investigations, about charges." "Let me go," Monroe gasped. "This isn't helping anything." "Oh, I'll help something," Kincaid snarled, drawing back his fist. "I'll help you understand what happens to rats." The blow never landed. A commotion erupted from around the corner. Shouting, the sound of scuffling. Kincaid hesitated, then released Monroe as a guard's radio crackled with calls for assistance. "Inmate fight in a corridor. Need backup." Kincaid pointed at Monroe. "This isn't over," he promised before rushing toward the disturbance. Monroe slumped against the wall, gasping for breath. When he finally made his way toward the exit, he caught a glimpse of the fight being broken up, and for a brief moment locked eyes with Devin Harper, who gave him the faintest of nods before being restrained by guards. It had been a diversion, Monroe realized. Somehow Harper had known he was in danger. The lines between inmates and officers, between oppressors and oppressed, were blurring. Old alliances crumbling, new ones forming in their place. A Department of Justice inspection? Lieutenant Rankin's face paled as Warden Dawes delivered the news. "How much notice do we have?" 48 hours, Dawes replied, her voice tight with controlled panic. "They're citing credible allegations of civil rights violations as grounds for an unscheduled site visit. This is because of the hunger strike, the media attention. It's because someone has been systematically documenting incidents and sharing them externally," Dawes corrected. "Monroe, obviously. Probably Boone, too." Rankin paced the office. "We need to clean house. Transfer problem inmates. Tillman, Harper, the other organizers. Get them out before the inspection." "Too late for that," Dawes said. "Any mass transfers now would only confirm wrongdoing. We need to focus on controlling the narrative." She straightened papers on her desk. "A nervous habit. Prepare all supervisors. Inmates who speak to investigators should be carefully noted. We'll address those conversations afterward." "And Kincaid?" Dawes hesitated. "He's a liability now. Too volatile, too visible in the complaints." "He's also loyal," Rankin argued. "He'll protect the institution." "Will he?" Dawes didn't sound convinced. "I saw him today. He's unraveling. Men like Kincaid don't handle scrutiny well." Before Rankin could respond, Dawes's phone rang. The brief conversation left her face ashen. "What is it?" Rankin asked when she hung up. "That was corporate. The inspection team includes prosecutors from the criminal section." She met his eyes. "They only bring prosecutors when they're considering charges." The implication settled heavily between them. This wasn't just about institutional practices anymore. It was about potential criminal liability. "We need to be very careful about what happens in the next 48 hours, Dawes said quietly. "Very careful indeed." In the prison yard, Devin Harper stood apart from the other inmates, his gaze fixed on the fence line where outside scrutiny had finally breached Coldwater's isolation. News vans were visible on the main road, their satellite dishes raised, reporters doing stand-ups with the prison as backdrop. Vasquez approached, looking gaunt after 4 days without food. "Something's happening," he said without preamble. "Guards are nervous, talking about feds coming." Harper nodded. "Marcus's plan is working. The pressure's building from outside, while we maintain it from inside." "For how much longer?" Vasquez asked, the strain evident in his voice. "My guys are weak from hunger. Some are talking about giving up." "Tell them to hold on," Harper replied. "1 more day, 2 at most." "How can you be sure?" Harper nodded toward the news vans. "Because the system only moves when its secrets are exposed, and Coldwater's secrets are spilling out now." As they spoke, a guard approached, one of the younger officers who'd shown less enthusiasm for Rankin's harsh tactics. "Harper," he said quietly. "Medical evaluation for all hunger strikers. Warden's orders." Harper studied him. "Why the sudden concern?" The guard glanced around, then lowered his voice further. "DOJ's coming, big inspection. They're trying to show they're following protocols." After the guard moved on, Vasquez turned to Harper. "They're covering their asses." "Which means they're scared," Harper replied. "And scared people make mistakes." In his segregation cell, Marcus carefully tore a final page from his hidden notebook. His message was simple, meant for Harper through their napkin communication system. DOJ coming. Final phase. No compromises. He'd rejected Dawes's offer because he understood a fundamental truth about power. It never surrenders anything without demand, without pressure, without the threat of greater loss. The hunger strike, the documented abuses, the media attention, all were leverage, forcing a system built on secrecy into the disinfecting light of public scrutiny. Marcus had planned for this moment since his first day at Coldwater, watching, learning, building networks of trust among men society had discarded. Not for escape, not for revenge, but for justice, for recognition of their essential humanity. As night fell on the 11th day of his isolation, Marcus heard keys jangling outside his door. Through the small window appeared Kincaid's face, distorted with barely contained rage. "Special midnight inspection," Kincaid announced, unlocking the door. "Just you and me, Tillman. Time we had a proper conversation about all this trouble you've been causing." Marcus stood slowly, facing the door as it swung open. Whatever happened next, the plan was already in motion beyond any individual's control. The truth had been set free. Now it was simply a matter of surviving long enough to see it prevail. The Department of Justice inspection team arrived at 8 a.m. sharp, 6 officials in dark suits presenting credentials at Coldwater's front gate. By 8:05, Warden Dawes was escorting them to the administrative conference room, her professional smile masking rising panic. "Coldwater has always prided itself on transparency," she assured them, gesturing to the prepared binders of policies and procedures. "We welcome your review." Lead investigator Sandra Torres didn't touch the binders. "We'll need access to all areas of the facility, unrestricted, including segregation units." "Of course," Dawes agreed smoothly. "Though I should mention we're currently managing a coordinated hunger strike. Some areas may be under modified protocols for inmate safety." "The hunger strike is partly why we're here," Torres replied. "We've received concerning reports about conditions that may have prompted it." As they spoke, the prison's loudspeakers crackled to life. "Attention all inmates, facility-wide lockdown for administrative inspection. Return to cells immediately." Torres raised an eyebrow. "A lockdown won't be necessary. We intend to speak with inmates. Standard procedure during external inspections," Dawes explained, "for everyone's safety." "Not this time," Torres countered firmly. "Please cancel the lockdown, Warden, unless there's something you don't want us to see." In the segregation unit, Marcus heard the lockdown announcement followed unusually quickly by a cancellation. Something had changed in Coldwater's power dynamic. His confrontation with Kincaid the night before had ended unexpectedly. Just as the guard had entered his cell, Lieutenant Rankin had appeared, ordering Kincaid to the warden's office immediately. The reprieve had been narrow, the threat still palpable in Kincaid's eyes as he'd reluctantly withdrawn. Now approaching footsteps drew Marcus's attention to his cell door. It swung open to reveal not guards, but two suited officials flanked by Lieutenant Rankin, whose expression combined fear and fury in equal measure. "Inmate Tillman," one official said. "I'm Investigator Torres with the Department of Justice. We'd like to speak with you." Rankin interjected. "This inmate is in administrative segregation for inciting disruption. Any statements he makes should be considered." "Thank you, Lieutenant," Torres cut him off. "We're aware of the circumstances. Please have Mr. Tillman escorted to the interview room." As Marcus was led out, he caught sight of other officials moving through the segregation unit, documenting conditions, speaking with inmates. The walls that had contained Coldwater's secrets for so long were becoming transparent. Eli Monroe sat across from two DOJ attorneys, his testimony flowing more easily than he'd expected. The weight of secrets lifted with each revelation. After the cafeteria incident where Sergeant Kincaid spat in Tillman's food, there was a pattern of targeted harassment, he explained. The library confrontation was deliberate. Kincaid physically assaulted Tillman using racial slurs. "And the response from administration?" one attorney asked. "Warden Dawes pressured me to sign a false statement. When I refused, I was isolated, then suspended." Monroe placed a flash drive on the table. "This contains evidence Nurse Boone compiled. Medical documentation of injuries inconsistent with official reports, spanning years. You understand this testimony could result in criminal charges for some officers?" Monroe nodded solemnly. "I do. I also understand that remaining silent would make me complicit in abuse I can no longer pretend not to see." As he continued detailing specific incidents, Monroe felt something unexpected. Not fear of reprisal, but relief. Whatever happened to his career now, he had reclaimed something more valuable: his integrity. Carla Boone's testimony was clinical, precise, and devastating. February 18, 2010, she stated, referencing her personal records. Inmate Jackson arrived at medical with 3 broken ribs and facial contusions. Official report claimed he fell downstairs. My examination noted knuckle imprints consistent with multiple punches. Torres flipped through Boone's documentation. Hundreds of similar incidents meticulously recorded over decades. "Why maintain separate records?" Torres asked. "Because official files would be altered or disappear," Boone explained. "I began documenting discrepancies after an inmate died in 2007, following what was reported as natural causes. The autopsy showed a ruptured spleen from blunt force trauma." "And you never reported these discrepancies to authorities?" Boone's composure briefly faltered. "I told myself I was helping by treating inmates properly, by keeping records that might someday matter. I convinced myself that was enough." She met Torres's gaze directly. "It wasn't. That's why I'm here now." In the administrative section, panic was setting in. Dawes paced her office while Rankin reported the deteriorating situation. "They've interviewed Monroe, Boone, and at least 15 inmates, including Tillman," he said. "They're combing through medical and disciplinary records, comparing them with the documentation Boone provided." "We need to control the narrative," Dawes insisted. "These are dangerous criminals making unsubstantiated accusations." "The evidence isn't unsubstantiated," Rankin countered, "and the DOJ team includes prosecutors. This isn't just an administrative review anymore." Dawes stopped pacing. "Where's Kincaid?" "I haven't seen him since morning count." Something in Rankin's tone made Dawes look up sharply. "What aren't you telling me, Lieutenant?" "He was acting erratic, talking about taking care of the problem once and for all. I thought it best to assign him to perimeter duty, away from inmates." Dawes's face paled. "Find him, now." Marcus sat in the interview room, facing Torres and another investigator. For 3 hours he had methodically laid out everything: the pattern of abuse, the racial targeting, the system of silence and retaliation that kept inmates from reporting violations. "You've been extraordinarily precise with dates, names, and incidents," Torres observed, "almost as if you've been documenting this systematically." "I have," Marcus acknowledged, "not just for myself, but for everyone at Coldwater who couldn't Speak up. Your disciplinary record was spotless until recently, the other investigator noted. Why risk everything with this resistance campaign? Marcus considered the question carefully. Because there comes a point where silence becomes complicity, where survival at any cost means losing something essential. He leaned forward slightly. I may be serving time for my mistakes, but that doesn't make me less human. None of us are. Torres nodded, something like respect in her expression. We'll need a formal statement, but given the broader investigation now underway, I'm recommending your immediate release from segregation. Before Marcus could respond, shouting erupted in the corridor outside. The door burst open to reveal Sergeant Kincaid, wild-eyed and disheveled, shoving past a guard to enter the room. This is all a setup, he shouted, pointing at Marcus. He's been coordinating with outside agitators, smuggling contraband. From his pocket, Kincaid produced a makeshift knife and small bag of what appeared to be drugs. Found these in his cell during inspection. Torres stood. Sergeant Kincaid, this is a federal interview. This animal has everyone fooled, Kincaid continued, his voice rising hysterically, playing the victim while manipulating the whole system. That's enough. Rankin appeared in the doorway, officers behind him. Stand down, Sergeant. Instead of complying, Kincaid lunged toward Marcus, as if to plant the items on him or provoke a reaction. But Marcus remained seated, hands visible on the table, expression carefully neutral. Look at him, Kincaid shouted, acting innocent. You didn't seem so peaceful in the library when you came at me. As guards restrained Kincaid, another figure stepped into the doorway, Devin Harper, accompanied by a different DOJ official. And, in Harper's hand was a small contraband phone, its screen displaying a video. You might want to see this, Harper said, presenting the phone to Torres, recorded 30 minutes ago. Sergeant Kincaid entering the storage closet, taking items from a shelter, then heading toward segregation. Torres watched the video, then turned to Kincaid with cold fury. Planting evidence? During a federal investigation? Attempting to frame an inmate while Justice Department officials are present? As Kincaid was led away, still shouting about conspiracies and betrayal, Marcus exchanged a brief look with Harper. No words were necessary. The plan, from its careful beginning to this unexpected climax, had succeeded beyond their imagining. The truth, so long suppressed, was finally in the open, and it was more powerful than any act of violence could have been. 3 days later, Coldwater Correctional Facility was barely recognizable. DOJ officials occupied administrative offices. Guards moved uncertainly through their shifts, aware that their actions were being monitored. The hunger strike had ended after Torres personally met with inmate representatives, promising substantial changes and oversight. In the prison yard, Marcus stood beside Harper, both men squinting in the Mississippi sunshine after so many days confined indoors. Heard Kincaid's facing federal charges, Harper said quietly. Rankin, too, and the warden suspended pending investigation. Marcus nodded. Corporate will try to contain it, claim it was just a few bad actors. But we know different. Harper replied, and now others do too. Across the yard, Monroe, surprisingly reinstated under DOJ supervision, was speaking with a group of officials. He caught Marcus's eye and gave a slight nod of acknowledgement. What happens now? Harper asked. Reform, if we're lucky, Marcus answered. Oversight, new policies, perhaps even leadership that sees inmates as human. If we're very lucky, this could spark changes beyond just Coldwater. And if we're not lucky? Marcus watched as new guards, brought in from other facilities, took up positions along the perimeter. Then we've still done something important. We've shown that solidarity can overcome even the most entrenched system. That truth, properly leveraged, is more powerful than any weapon. Harper studied his friend's face. You really believe things will change? Some things already have, Marcus replied. Look around. Throughout the yard, something unprecedented was happening. Inmates who had maintained rigid racial separation for years were mingling, speaking freely. The invisible barriers that had divided them, barriers the administration had carefully cultivated, were dissolving in the wake of their unified resistance. "Don't mistake this for freedom," Marcus cautioned. "We're still serving our sentences. But maybe, just maybe, we can serve them in a place that doesn't strip away our humanity in the process." As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the yard, Marcus gazed beyond the fence to the news van still positioned on the main road. The story of Coldwater was reaching the outside world. Other prisons would take notice. Other inmates might find courage. Other truth might find its way into the light. Marcus Tillman was still inmate number 247,891, still bound by the prison's walls. But as he stood in the yard with Harper beside him, bearing witness to the beginning of something new, he felt a different kind of freedom, the kind that comes from standing firmly in one's truth regardless of the consequences. It was enough. For now, it was enough. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.